Yeah, I hope so. And again, the main thing is that we need a global thinking on this, because in the last few decades, what we've seen is a reduction in global inequality. Global inequality was extremely high in the early 20th century, when you had a few industrial powers colonizing the rest of the world. So say Britain dominating India and much of Africa and much of the Middle East. And the disparity was enormous. Mm-hmm. And then in the last few decades, the gap wasn't completely closed, but India and Britain are now far, far closer than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So we have seen a reduction in global inequality. But now we are on the verge of a new burst of growing inequality. Just like the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, this is what created initially the gap between Britain and India. So now you have the AI revolution concentrated in just a few countries. The USA and China are leading the race. You have a few other countries which joined the race. Most countries are far behind. And the economic consequences will be enormous. So the danger is that what we have seen a century ago will come back. And then it's not just a question, say, of people in Brazil, rich people in Brazil, caring about poor people in Brazil and investing in their education and healthcare and so forth. There won't be enough resources in Brazil, or maybe not Brazil, but some other countries. So we need global thinking on that. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it will be a rerun of the Industrial Revolution, with these enormous gaps between a few countries that dominate the world and most of humanity, which is far, far behind.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I guess my thinking from where I'm always coming from is just, to me, the global thinking always needs to be towards how we create more meaningful careers, how we create more meaningful jobs, how we create opportunities for people to be better engaged.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to create a happier, more peaceful, more cohesive world. Mm-hmm. It's almost like otherwise there's a rerun in culture of you slot people in to jobs they don't want to do, that aren't good for their health, mentally or physically. That then leads to another repercussion of that person being dissatisfied, and then that reruns.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that having met some of the most influential people on the planet, do you feel that that's the dial, that's the compass that we're trying to get to? Or do you think that's just far off?
The most influential people?
Yeah.
Most of them are too busy with the immediate crisis.
Right.
I mean, part of the problem, and this a little goes back to what we discussed earlier about boredom and things like that they are overexcited. And I mean, I can understand them. I mean, I'm lucky I don't have a country to run. I don't have a multi-billion corporation to run
yet.
So I can allow myself the time to, just read a book or just go for a walk or go for take a meditation retreat. They can't. And part of the issue...
They can't or they won't?
They really can't. I mean, they have so much on their plate. They have all these immediate crises. And like we had just the case in France with the protests against Emmanuel Macron. And one of the things that the protesters told him, and I'm not judging who is right, who is wrong, I don't understand French politics well enough. I was just struck by what they said, that because the initial cause was that he wanted to impose a new tax on fuel partly in order to combat climate change. And this caused a huge backlash. And some of the protesters told the president, you're thinking about what will happen 20 years from now. We are thinking about the end of the month. We don't have money for the end of the month. We don't care about 20 years from now. And that's a real issue. It's easy, and I talk a lot about we need to do something about climate change. But then a simplistic answer, okay, let's just put money on a tax on fuel. And if this tax hurts disproportionately poorer people, then this is not a good solution. So now he has this crisis on his hands, and he can't just, I'll just go on this long 2 months retreat, and I'll do meditation, I'll hike in the Alps, and I'll inform myself about climate change, and he doesn't have the time. He has that, he has Brexit, he has the EU elections, he has the crisis in Libya, he has the relations with China. And by the time you reach this influential place, you really don't have the luxury to think slow and broad. And that's a huge problem for the system. And again, I don't have like these easy solutions. Part of the idea of, addressing the general public, like what we are doing here, and not just going and talking with a few presidents and CEOs, is to realize that yes, they are very influential people, but they are also extremely limited by their position of power and by the enormous pressures on them from different directions. So even for the influential people, it would be easier to do something on climate change if you have tens of millions of people saying that this is their number one priority and that they are willing to make some painful sacrifices for that. And it's the same with the kind of global educational crisis that I hope that more and more people around the world understand that, the consequences of this crisis, we will see them only in 20 years. When the people today in Indonesia and Nigeria and Brazil, who are now in kindergarten, when they will be 30 and 40, this is when the full force of the crisis will hit. But if we wait until they are 40 to do something about it, it's too late. Yeah. We need to think what we are teaching youngsters today in order to solve the coming crisis of 2050.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think I think that's a very good analysis of the situation, because I appreciate that there is no quick solution, there is no easy recipe. And when I'm listening to you talk, there's parts of me that are thinking like it's the way we've constructed these roles of influence, that these people don't have the time and space and the boredom to be able to actually do their jobs properly. Like, we've not created these roles efficiently and effectively. And at the same time, the responsibility on each and every one of us listening and watching right now to actually become change makers ourselves, to be someone who takes responsibility for action, to be a part of the solution, to actually step up and say, no, this is a priority and we need to go in that direction. I think that is, even though it's not a quick recipe, I think it's a good wake-up call. I think it's a good wake-up call that can make us all aware that we can't just wait for this to be solved from the top, because that's not really going to happen.
Especially assuming that a lot of our viewers and listeners are in the United States, then America is still the most powerful country in the world, economically, militarily, politically. So Americans can do more than the citizens of any other country. And there is still, this expectation that America will be the leader of the world. In recent years, it's been going in the opposite direction. That it's really, I think that's very unfortunate, abdicating, willingly abdicating its role as leader of the world. For decades, both from the right and left, Republicans, Democrats, what was common to all the spectrum of American political system was that they intentionally saw themselves as the leaders of at least the free world. And then in the last few years, America comes and says, no, we don't want this job anymore. For us, America first. We need to, first of all, think about ourselves and our own interests.